What happened that night wasn't in the script, not the silence, not the stare, not the walk-off that would shake the entire studio and explode across the internet in under an hour. This was supposed to be a promo segment, late-night fluff. A few jokes, a few stories, a nod to the movie, then roll credits. Instead, Clint Eastwood, Hollywood's last gunslinger, stood from that chair like it was the saddle of a warhorse, dropped one final line that made the room freeze, and walked straight off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live, without looking back. But before we rewind to the moment that set this whole thing ablaze, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? LA? Texas? Hiding in Jimmy's dressing room, praying Clint doesn't find you? Drop it in the comments, and if you're from Clint's hometown, we won't judge. Just watch your tone. Now let's roll it back. To the moment it all started to feel off. The studio was humming, not the fake energy you get when the warm-up guy begs the crowd to clap louder. No, this was real, the kind of crackle that floats in the air when a legend's in the building. Clint Eastwood, 94 years old, back straight, eyes sharp, was minutes from stepping on stage. He hadn't done many interviews in years. Not the fun kind anyway, but this film, this one was different. A slow-burning drama about a veteran rancher fending off a corrupt tech company trying to seize his land. It mirrored Clint's real-world ethos, grit, tradition, defiance, so he agreed. One sit-down, one camera, one message, and nothing else. But Jimmy's team, they had other plans. Producers had already whispered it. We need a viral moment. The word TikTok had been thrown around too many times for comfort. Clint's longtime assistant, Maggie, caught wind of it an hour before the show. "I'm telling you now," she warned one of the producers backstage. "If you try to turn him into a meme, you're gonna regret it." They smiled politely and ignored her completely. In the green room, Clint sat alone. He sipped black coffee. No sugar, no cream. He watched the studio monitor with a kind of calm that made the interns uncomfortable. Jimmy's monologue had just started, full of digs about Hollywood egos, celebrity meltdowns, and a surprise appearance from a guy in a banana costume. Clint didn't blink, didn't laugh. His fingers tapped the side of the coffee cup in rhythm, like a man waiting for the next move in a chess game. Maggie stood beside him, arms crossed. "They're gonna try something," she said under her breath. Clint just nodded. "They always do." Meanwhile, onstage, Jimmy was warming up the crowd for the main event. "You know our next guest," he grinned. "He's directed some of the greatest films in history. He starred in even more. He once made eye contact with a grizzly bear, and the bear blinked first." "Ladies and gentlemen, Clint Eastwood," the crowd roared. A bluesy riff from the house band kicked in, and from the curtain Clint appeared. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He walked with that same familiar stride, like every step had a purpose, like the floor should be honored to hold his boots. He shook Jimmy's hand, firm, brief, and sat down. Jimmy leaned in, smile wide. "So Clint, great to see you. You look dangerous." Laughter. Clint didn't respond, he simply waited. The first few minutes went fine. Jimmy asked about the movie. Clint answered, slow, thoughtful, no fluff. He talked about how land teaches you patience, how greed tries to rewrite the rules. He spoke about loyalty, not in Hollywood terms, but the kind that holds up when everything else crumbles. The crowd hung on every word, until Jimmy tried to pivot. "So Clint," he said, eyes twinkling, "do you still ride horses, or are you more of a golf cart guy now?" Polite laughter. Clint's jaw twitched. "When I need to ride," he said, "I ride." The tone, flat, but the weight, heavy. Jimmy chuckled, sensing the moment slipping. He tried another angle. "I heard a story," he said, "about you breaking up a bar fight on the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales, with a pool cue. Is that true?" Clint didn't blink. "Didn't happen," he said. The silence after that cut through the set like a whip crack. Jimmy blinked. "Oh. Must have been another cowboy legend, huh?" The band gave a nervous little sting. Maggie, watching from the wings, muttered, "They're pushing it." Jimmy, now visibly trying to recover the mood, reached under the desk. He pulled out a prop cowboy hat, foam, oversized, clearly meant for laughs. "Come on, Clint, just one quick shot for the fans," he said, holding it up. The crowd started clapping, not everyone but enough. Clint looked at the hat, then at Jimmy. "Put that away," he said. The words weren't loud, but they echoed. The clapping stopped. Jimmy hesitated, still holding the hat. Clint leaned in just a fraction. "I'm not your punchline." Backstage, a producer whispered, "Cut to break," but the director shook his head. "This is gold." On stage, Jimmy tried to backpedal. "No hats tonight," he joked, tossing it aside. "Fair enough." But the air had shifted. Clint wasn't playing along, and the audience knew it. He wasn't angry, he wasn't shouting. But his silence, it was louder than anything Jimmy had said that night. Jimmy tried steering the conversation back to the movie. Clint let him, for about 10 seconds. Then he cut in. "You know," Clint said, his voice low but clear, "I came here to talk about something real, not to be a dancing monkey in your circus." You could feel it. The room snapped taut like a drawn bow. Some gasped. A few clapped. One guy in the back muttered, "Damn." Jimmy smiled, lips tight. "We're just having a little fun here, Clint." Clint looked at him, deadpan. "This fun for you." The control room was buzzing. Producers panicked. Cameras rolled. Jimmy kept smiling, but it was cracked. He reached for another cue card. Clint stopped him again. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive," he said, voice steel. "I don't need your spotlight, I bring my own." Boom, crowd, half erupting, half stunned. Jimmy leaned forward, trying to keep control. "Look, Clint, people love you, they want to see the legend." Clint nodded. "They don't want a clown, they want the truth." And with that, the camera zoomed in just enough to catch the stare that would become 1,000 GIFs, the moment that froze Jimmy Kimmel on his own stage. Then Clint stood. No announcement, no final joke. He just looked at Jimmy one last time and said, "You had your shot." He walked off set, slow, unbothered, the crowd stunned, parting like water around him. And that was just the beginning. The studio didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds after Clint walked out. 5 seconds. That's all it took for the crew to look at each other like the power just went out in the middle of a live broadcast. Because in a way, it did. Jimmy was still seated, hands on the desk, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But the muscles in his jaw said otherwise. He gave a small laugh, not to the crowd, not even to the camera, but almost to himself. "Well, that was something, huh?" The audience gave a confused chuckle. A few clapped. One woman in the front row muttered, "He just left." Another said, "He warned him." And Jimmy, still smiling, still hosting, looked off camera and waved the band to play something. They started in with a peppy riff, but it sounded hollow, like a marching band at a funeral. Backstage, the floor producer was pacing. Maggie leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching it all unfold on the monitor with a face like stone. "I told you," she said. "I told you." 10 minutes earlier, that same producer had laughed off Maggie's warning. "We're not trying to disrespect him," he said. "Just loosen him up. He's old school, he'll come around." Now he was being screamed at through his headset by the executive producer in the booth. "What the hell just happened? You lost Clint Eastwood on air. You know what this is going to do to us." The ratings were surging. Social media was already erupting, and no one in the building could decide if this was the worst thing that ever happened on Jimmy Kimmel Live, or the best. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood wasn't storming out. He was walking, deliberate, unhurried. He didn't say a word as he passed the camera crew. Didn't even blink at the security guys who looked like they'd been bracing for a fistfight that never came. He stepped into the hallway behind the stage like a man leaving a courtroom, not a talk show. And as he passed the green room door, Maggie fell into step beside him. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded once. She opened the side exit that led to the parking lot. There was no driver waiting, no black car with the engine running. Clint just kept walking toward the street. Inside, Jimmy tried to recover. He smiled into the camera. "Well, folks, I guess we'll be taking a little unscheduled break. But hey, stay tuned, because when we come back, a performance by Panic at the Costco." A few scattered laughs. The show cut to commercial, and as soon as the lights dimmed, Jimmy stood, ripped off his lapel mic, and muttered to his assistant, "Get me out of this." The studio lights were still glowing, but the vibe had turned ice cold. Some crew members tried to carry on like nothing had happened, resetting the desk, clearing props, but others just stood there, dazed, like they just witnessed a drive-by monologue. Back in the control room, chaos reigned. Producers barked orders. Interns typed frantically on laptops. Someone in graphics was already asked to prep a YouTube thumbnail with the words "Unreal Walk-Off." But one of the executive producers, a seasoned vet named Laurel, held up a hand. "Let it play out," she said. "This is bigger than the show." She wasn't wrong. Clips of Clint's final line, "You had your shot," were already circulating on Twitter and TikTok. Edited versions with dramatic music, slow zooms, even one with Clint edited into a spaghetti western. The internet was fast and ruthless. Some fans hailed it as a masterclass in not tolerating disrespect. Others accused Kimmel of trying to bait a 94. year-old legend into a viral gag. Either way, everyone was watching. Outside, Clint stood on the curb. No cameras, no reporters. Just a few crew members watching from a distance, unsure if they should approach. He looked out at the Hollywood sign glowing in the distance, didn't say a word. Maggie pulled out her phone. "You want me to call the driver?" Clint didn't answer right away. "I'll walk," he said finally. "You sure?" "I've walked off worse sets than this," he said. "Besides, I don't need a ride when I've already left the circus." Maggie nodded, slipping the phone back in her pocket. They started down the street, the chaos of the studio fading behind them. Back inside, Jimmy was fuming but trying to hide it. He knew the cameras would be back on soon. He needed to shift the energy, reclaim the narrative. But no matter how many jokes he rehearsed in his head, none of them landed, because deep down, Jimmy knew Clint hadn't just walked out. He had won. The crowd hadn't booed him. They hadn't laughed at him. They had watched him, like a man who wasn't there to entertain but to remind them what dignity looks like under fire. 10 minutes into the next segment, Jimmy tried to joke about it. He made a few quips. "Guess I won't be getting invited to Clint's next barbecue. Note to self, never bring a foam hat to a gunfight." The crowd laughed lightly, but the moment had passed. Even the musical guests that night looked uncomfortable, like they were performing at a wake. Behind the scenes, ABC execs were already on the phone, debating how to spin it. Do we issue a statement? Do we lean into it? Do we apologize? But Clint didn't wait for any of that. The next morning, a video surfaced. Clint walking through a quiet residential street in Studio City. No entourage, no fanfare. A woman in her 30s recognized him, pulled out her phone, and caught just a few seconds as he passed. "Mr. Eastwood, what happened last night?" Clint looked at her, then down at the sidewalk, then back up. "I told the truth," he said, and kept walking. By noon, the hashtag #Eastwood exit was trending globally. People were posting their favorite Clint quotes, side by side with stills from the walk-off. The top comment on YouTube: "Clint didn't walk out of the show. He walked back into legend." Meanwhile, Jimmy's team scrambled to get ahead of the wave. They uploaded the full interview, edited with soft background music to make it feel less tense. But viewers weren't buying it. The comments were brutal. "Why'd you push him? You invited Clint Eastwood and tried to turn him into a meme. This ain't it, Jimmy." Maggie, back in their hotel suite, handed Clint a tablet. "You've gone viral," she said. He raised an eyebrow. She clicked play on a mashup, clips of Clint's stare synced to an Ennio Morricone soundtrack. He watched for a few seconds, then handed it back. "They still don't get it," he said. Maggie asked, "Then why'd you go on the show?" He turned to the window, watching the Los Angeles skyline fade behind the morning fog. "Sometimes the best way to show people what matters is to let them see what doesn't." And just like that, he picked up his coat. It wasn't about a hat. It wasn't about a joke. It was about a man with nothing left to prove, being asked to play a part he didn't believe in. And when he refused, he didn't shout, he didn't storm, he just walked. And that's what made it unforgettable. Well, before we continue, if you're enjoying this story and love such dramas, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber keeps me motivated to dig deeper, uncover more wild stories, and bring you even crazier content. Your support means everything. It's what keeps this channel going strong. And trust me, there's plenty more chaos coming your way. Back to the story. By day 2, the walk-off wasn't just a moment. It was a movement. Clips of Clint rising from his chair, staring Jimmy down, and delivering that last quiet line, "You had your shot," had been viewed over 42 million times across all platforms. People weren't just watching it. They were analyzing it like it was courtroom footage. The way Clint never raised his voice, the stillness in his hands, the tension in Jimmy's grin as it slowly cracked under pressure. Reaction videos flooded YouTube, men in garages, teens in dorm rooms, ex-Marines, film critics, even therapists, all weighing in on one thing: this wasn't just a walkout. This was a masterclass in control. The mainstream media finally caught up. CNN ran a lower third banner: Eastwood vs. Kimmel, clash of the eras. Fox News called it the moment America remembered how to stand tall. And TMZ, well, they just wanted to know if Clint was okay. He was more than okay. He was legendary again. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel was unraveling. He opened the next night's monologue with a joke about the situation. "So, Clint Eastwood walked out on me," he began. Laughs, but forced. "He's the only guest I've had that left more dramatic than can I." The audience laughed harder, but the energy was different now. They weren't with him. They were watching him. It wasn't just a show anymore. It was damage control. He tried to keep the monologue moving, jokes about Trump, the economy, a weird bit about alpacas, but none of it stuck, because the ghost of Clint was still sitting in that chair, unbothered, untouched. And that silence from 2 nights ago, it was now louder than anything Jimmy could say. Back in Studio City, Clint had no statement to release, no apology, no tweet, no PR team. What he did have was an offer. His publicist, Janine, called Maggie. "You won't believe who just reached out. Try me. Joe Rogan's people, they want Clint for the podcast. 2 hours, long form, no scripts." Maggie didn't even hesitate. "No," Janine blinked. "No," he said what he had to say, on air with his feet. Janine sighed. "We could leverage this moment, you know." "We already did," Maggie said, "by not chasing it." But not everyone stayed quiet. Inside ABC headquarters, a storm was brewing. Jimmy's executive producers were divided. One side wanted to smooth things over, maybe even invite Clint back for a quiet reconciliation. The other side wanted to lean into the drama. "Controversy sells," one said. "Turn it into a segment, spin it." Laurel, the veteran producer, shut them down. "You don't spin Clint Eastwood, you survive him." And then came the meeting with the network president. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "Fix it, before the public decides who we are." Jimmy didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid of Clint Eastwood, but because he realized for the first time in a long while that he wasn't untouchable. He thought about how easily Clint had dismantled the show's rhythm, not with insults, not with threats, but with silence, with a stare. Jimmy replayed the footage on his phone again and again and again. His own smile made him cringe, the fake laugh, the hat. "God," he whispered. "Why did I bring out that stupid hat?" 3 days after the walk-off, Clint got a letter. It wasn't from Jimmy. It wasn't from the studio. It was from a 17-year-old high school student in Nebraska. The envelope was plain, the handwriting a little messy. Inside was one line: "Thank you for not backing down. My dad showed me the clip. We watched it together twice." Clint stared at the note for a long time, then he folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, didn't say a word. But Maggie noticed. The corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile. Just approval. Back online, the internet wasn't done. A TikTok creator with over 1 million followers uploaded a mashup of Clint's final moments over the Inception soundtrack. It hit 6 million views in a day. On Reddit, a thread titled "Clint Eastwood just taught a masterclass in dignity" was upvoted to the front page. The comments were savage toward Jimmy. He tried to make a joke. He got handed a lesson. Clint didn't need the mic, he had presence. You can't humiliate a man who doesn't play your game. Somewhere in Beverly Hills, a late-night competitor watched the whole thing unfold with mild glee. He turned to his head writer. "You know, if I'd pulled that with Eastwood, he'd have decked me." The writer grinned. "You would have deserved it." "Yeah," the host said, "but it would have made great television." But not everyone saw Clint's walkout as a win. A few critics took to Twitter with takes like, "Eastwood is just another out-of-touch relic who can't handle late-night humor." But every time someone said that, hundreds more replied. "He didn't storm out, he walked out. That's different." There's a reason silence scares people more than shouting. Clint didn't need the spotlight, he just knew when to turn it off. Maggie scrolled through the noise quietly from the passenger seat of the rental car. They were halfway to the desert. A press tour stop Clint had scheduled before everything blew up. He hadn't canceled it. He hadn't canceled anything. He just moved forward, like always. "You want to respond to any of this?" she asked, tilting the phone toward him. Clint glanced at it, then back at the road. "No, not even to the talk about Jimmy being disrespectful." Clint's fingers tapped the steering wheel once, then again. Finally, he said, "You respond to disrespect by walking past it, not through it." At the next press stop, a small, independent film festival, Clint showed up on time, spoke softly, and gave one of the most heartfelt interviews of the year. When asked how he dealt with today's content culture, he gave a rare, honest answer. "I make things I believe in. If people watch, great. If they don't, that doesn't change the work." The room clapped, but more importantly, they listened. Because the man who had just walked out of national television with his dignity intact wasn't bitter, he was grounded, back in LA. Jimmy wasn't done dealing with the fallout. ABC had issued a quiet internal memo. "Let's stay respectful with legacy guests going forward." Sponsors hadn't pulled out yet, but some were closely monitoring the situation. And Jimmy, who once thrived on pushing limits, started to rethink where his line was. Was it the joke, the hat, the fact that he tried to laugh over a man who wasn't laughing? He didn't have the answer. But he knew the question was sticking to him like smoke, and then came the whisper. Clint might come back. No one could confirm it. It started as a rumor online, then a blog post, then an inside source article on Deadline. Jimmy's team reached out again to Clint's publicist. They pitched a respectful sit-down, no jokes, no props, just a sincere moment of reflection. Janine passed the request to Maggie. Maggie brought it to Clint. He sat with it, didn't answer, just stared out at the horizon. Then finally he stood, and without looking back he said, "If I return, I won't be the one who needs to speak." It had been 6 days since the walk-off, and Jimmy Kimmel's show hadn't been the same. The desk was the same. The band played the same songs. The audience laughed, sometimes too loudly. But Jimmy's rhythm off, he fumbled transitions, stepped over punchlines, and every time he leaned in to joke with a guest, there was hesitation, like he wasn't sure if they'd play along or pull a Clint. One night, his team brought out a veteran actress from the 80s, tough, brilliant, sharp as glass. Jimmy tried to slide in a soft roast, just like the old days. She blinked, didn't laugh. He laughed alone. The audience didn't cheer. They waited, watched. And Jimmy realized something terrifying. The rules had changed. Clint didn't just walk out of the studio. He walked out of the era. Meanwhile, Maggie sat in a hotel suite with a remote in her hand and 1,000 unread notifications on her phone. She watched a late-night replay of Jimmy's show, and for the first time in years he looked small. Not because the ratings were down, not because of the walk-off, but because he was trying too hard, trying to seem unfazed, trying to pretend everything was business as usual when the entire country had seen a moment he couldn't erase with laughter. Clint, on the other hand, was outside, in the desert, sitting on the tailgate of a truck with his coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. He wasn't writing. He was reading something he'd written long ago, an old line from a film script he'd scrapped back in 2009. Sometimes the quietest exit makes the loudest noise. He smiled. It wasn't a smug smile. It was the smile of a man who understood time, how long it took to build a reputation and how fast it could echo. Back in Hollywood, Jimmy's producers met in private. They needed a solution, a reset, a way to shift the narrative without looking desperate. Laurel, always the steady one, spoke first. "We can't undo what happened," she said, "but we can reframe it." "How?" "We invite him back." Heads turned. No tricks, no gags, just an olive branch. Another producer laughed. "Clint Eastwood doesn't take olive branches. He plants them, then builds a fence around them." But Laurel wasn't joking. "We extend the invitation, publicly, on air." That night, as Jimmy stood at his desk, the lights dimmed for a brief moment. He looked straight into the camera and said, "6 days ago, we had Clint Eastwood on this stage." He walked out. "And I want to take a minute to say this, not as a comedian, not as a host, but as a guy who maybe got caught trying to be funny when he should have been listening." The audience was dead silent. Jimmy continued, "So, Mr. Eastwood, if you're watching, the seat's still here. No jokes, no cowboy hats, just a conversation." He nodded once. The band didn't play. The show faded to commercial, and by morning the clip had gone viral again. Maggie watched it on a tablet while Clint stared out at the sunrise. She handed it to him without a word. He watched the whole thing. No interruptions, no commentary. When it ended, he handed it back and said, "Play it again." From the beginning. She did. And only after the second run-through did Clint speak. "He meant it," he said quietly. "Yeah," Maggie replied. "He did." Clint looked down at the coffee in his hand, then poured it out, got up, stretched his back. "Call Janine," he said. "You want to go back?" Clint didn't answer immediately. Then, "I want to finish what I started." When the news broke, Clint Eastwood returning to Jimmy Kimmel Live. The internet didn't believe it at first. Memes exploded. People debated what would happen. Some thought Clint would walk on and say nothing. Others believed he'd take over the monologue himself. But no one knew, because no one had seen someone like Clint come back after already owning the moment. And Jimmy, he didn't sleep the night before. He paced the hallways of the studio, sat alone at the desk long after rehearsal ended. And when the final crew member turned off the lights, he whispered, "Don't screw this up." The next night arrived. The studio was packed. Security had doubled, not because they expected a threat, but because the energy was so sharp, so loud, it made everyone edgy. Fans weren't just there to watch. They were there to witness. Jimmy walked onto the stage. The crowd clapped politely. But it was different. There was a tension in the room, not hostile, just alert. Jimmy gave no monologue, no jokes. He looked straight at the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Clint Eastwood." No music played, no fanfare, just footsteps. And then there he was, walking from the curtain, same pace, same presence, same stare. He approached the desk, looked at Jimmy, and extended his hand. Jimmy stood, took it, and nodded. No words yet, just the handshake, and the crowd, they stood, all of them. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was instinct, respect. They weren't clapping for Clint's fame. They were standing for what he represented: dignity, boundaries, truth without performance. They sat. And for the first time in Jimmy's career, there was no script, just two men. One who had something to own, one who didn't need anything at all. Jimmy took a breath. "Mr. Eastwood, thank you for coming back." Clint nodded. "I left a conversation unfinished." Jimmy smiled, tight but real. "And I pushed a moment too far." Clint leaned forward. "It wasn't about the hat." Jimmy blinked. "It wasn't." Clint shook his head. "It was about you trying to make a show, when I came here to talk about something real." Jimmy paused. The air hung heavy. He didn't joke, didn't deflect, he just nodded. "You're right. They talked about the film, about legacy. About what it means to age in front of the world and not flinch." Jimmy asked questions differently now, slower, deeper. Clint answered without the edge, just the truth. And somewhere between the 15-minute mark and the quiet laughter that came later, the studio shifted. It wasn't about recovery anymore. It was about reflection, and the audience felt it, like watching two parts of America, performance and principle, finally sit down at the same table. As the segment wrapped, Jimmy leaned in one last time. "I said this before, but thank you." Clint met his eyes. "Thank yourself. You listened." They stood. This time the handshake was longer, the nod deeper. And as Clint turned to walk off stage again, not in protest, not in anger, but in closure, the crowd erupted, not wild applause, but a wave of standing silence. Jimmy sat back down, and for once he didn't try to crack a joke. He just said, "That was Clint Eastwood, and he didn't come here to entertain you. He came to remind us that silence is the loudest voice of all." The door closed behind Clint Eastwood like the last note of a symphony. No music. No lights flashing. No post-show fanfare. Just the soft thud of wood against frame. And inside the studio, no one moved, not the cameramen, not the audience, not even Jimmy. It was as if everyone collectively realized they had just witnessed something they weren't supposed to interrupt. A real moment, raw, unscripted, unrepeatable. Jimmy looked toward the side of the stage where Clint had disappeared. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. He reached for his mug, then stopped again. The audience stayed standing, not clapping, not cheering, just still. Maggie, standing just beyond the curtain, gave one last glance toward the stage, then turned to follow Clint through the hallway, her steps calm, focused, like a guard escorting royalty through enemy territory. Back in the control room, the director whispered, "We still rolling?" The assistant nodded. "Wide cams live, audience on frame." The director stared at the monitor. "Leave it, don't cut." And so they didn't. That shot, Jimmy sitting alone at his desk, blinking into silence while a crowd stood behind him like stone, would be clipped and posted across every platform within hours. It would become known as the still frame. No hashtags, no captions. Just a freeze frame of a host no longer in control of his own stage. Outside, Clint walked calmly down the backstage hallway. He didn't speak. He didn't hurry. Maggie kept pace beside him, saying nothing until they reached the service door. The night was cool, quiet compared to the heat inside. Clint paused at the exit. Maggie held the door open, waiting. "You ready?" she asked. Clint looked back once, just once, toward the glowing light behind them. "I already said everything worth saying," he replied. Then he stepped into the night. Back in the studio, Jimmy finally spoke. His voice was lower now, grounded, like a man who'd taken a hit and was still catching his breath. That was Clint Eastwood, a man who didn't come back for a moment. He came back for a message. He paused, fingers lightly tapping the desk. "I think we all needed to hear that, especially me." Then he looked up. "We'll be right back." The crowd didn't cheer. They just slowly sat down. No music played. And as the cameras cut to commercial, the silence lingered in the room like smoke. Backstage, producers didn't scramble this time. They didn't yell. They didn't panic. They just sat. Laurel folded her arms and exhaled. Now that's how you finish a story. The junior staffer beside her, the one who'd suggested the cowboy hat gag a week ago, didn't say anything. He was still looking at the monitor, eyes wide, silent. When the segment aired in full later that night, no one fast-forwarded through it. No one clicked away. The ratings hit a season high, but that wasn't the story. The story was the quiet. People watched not for drama, but for stillness, for control. For something they hadn't seen on television in years. A conversation with no winner, no punchline, just presence. By morning, the reaction was everywhere. The New York Times ran a headline. Clint Eastwood walks in, walks out, and walks away with the room. Rolling Stone called it the best unspectacular moment of 2025, and Variety simply said, television finally shut up and listened. The clip of the handshake, the stare, the final line, "You listened," was the #1 trending video for the next 2 days. But this time the commentary was different, less heat, more depth. People weren't arguing anymore, they were reflecting. In the days that followed, Jimmy's tone shifted across the board. His jokes got sharper but not meaner. His interviews got slower but not boring. And for the first time in months, critics called his delivery thoughtful. He made no secret about why. On the Friday show, he opened with a personal monologue. "I've been in this game a long time, but last week I was reminded that respect doesn't come from airtime. It comes from listening." He looked straight into the lens, and "I'm still learning." The crowd clapped not out of habit but because they meant it. Meanwhile, Clint wasn't watching. He was out in Monterey, visiting a local diner where nobody asked about the show. He sat in the corner booth, ordered eggs and black coffee, and signed a napkin for the waitress's grandpa who'd watched Unforgiven every birthday since 1994. Maggie sat across from him, scrolling through articles. "You know you've been called the last Hollywood samurai on 3 different blogs now." Clint didn't look up. "Good name for a dog," Maggie chuckled. "That's going on a t-shirt." That night they checked into a small roadside motel. Clint sat out on the balcony with his notebook, pen in hand. He wasn't writing anything new, just reading what was already there. Page after page of dialogue, scenes that never made it to film, notes about the weight of silence. He turned to one line he'd scribbled in pencil years ago and underlined it. "The loudest man in the room usually has the least to say." Then he closed the notebook, stared at the stars, not waiting for applause, not waiting for a call, just resting back in LA. A producer from 60 Minutes called Janine. They wanted to sit down, serious questions. No fluff. Janine brought it to Maggie. Maggie brought it to Clint. He shook his head. "They already heard me." "No follow-up?" she asked. Clint sipped his coffee, then smiled slightly. "I don't do sequels." And so the moment lived on, not as a PR stunt, not as a scandal, but as a line in history. The night a man chose to leave, not because he was angry, but because he didn't want to stay somewhere that had forgotten the value of listening. There's a photo. It went viral weeks after the second interview. It wasn't taken by paparazzi, not by the studio, just a fan on their phone. Clint, walking alone down a dimly lit street, hands in his jacket, face relaxed. The caption, "No entourage, no spotlight." Still the most powerful man in the room. It's strange how some moments get louder after they're over. The second Clint walked off that set for the final time, the room went quiet. But outside, the noise grew. Clips, articles, think pieces, reaction videos, philosophers quoting him. Teenagers stitching his walk into motivational TikToks. But Clint himself, he said nothing. No tweet, no follow-up, no interview. And somehow that silence only amplified the message. 2 weeks after the second appearance, Maggie sat across from Clint in a small diner near Carmel. The waitress had just recognized him, politely, quietly, and brought over a free slice of pie without asking. Clint nodded his thanks, didn't touch it. Maggie had her phone open, reading comments from the latest viral video. Someone had edited together both interviews, the tension, the silence, the handshake, the stare, and ended it with Clint walking into the street under the words, "You listened." The clip had 28 million views. "Still going," she said. Clint shrugged. "I didn't do it for them." Maggie looked up. "Then why?" He sipped his coffee. "Because if no one draws a line, we forget where it is." Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel's team had finished rebuilding the show. The lighting had been softened. The set changed slightly, fewer props, less clutter, and the tone. It had matured. Guests spoke more, Jimmy interrupted less, segments ran longer, and the audience noticed. One comment under the latest episode read, "Feels like a new show. Not louder, better." One Friday, Laurel, the veteran producer, found herself alone in the empty studio after a taping. She walked to the stage and stood where Clint had once sat, looked toward the desk, then toward the audience seats. She didn't say anything, just took a breath. There was a kind of clarity in that space now, not peace, just honesty. And in this town, that was rarer than gold. Elsewhere in the country, something began to shift. Clips from the Eastwood Kimmel moment started showing up in unexpected places: business seminars, leadership talks, even university lectures. One professor called it a modern masterclass in restraint. A Fortune 500 CEO opened a keynote with Clint's final quote, "Respect's earned, not bought with lights and applause." And in a high school English class in Austin, Texas, a teacher played the full interview and asked his students, "What does it mean to walk away with your head high?" A 16-year-old kid in the back of the room said, "It means you don't wait to be told you matter. You decide when enough's enough." The world didn't change overnight, but the conversation did. And not because Clint Eastwood wanted it to, but because he didn't force it to. He let people come to their own conclusions. That's what made it stick. 3 weeks after the final episode aired, Clint and Maggie stopped at a quiet overlook off the coast. They'd been driving for hours. No destination, just movement. The Pacific spread out in front of them like glass. The wind was low, the waves soft. Clint got out of the car and stood at the edge of the cliff. Maggie leaned against the hood, arms crossed, watching him. After a long pause, she called out, "So what now?" Clint didn't turn around. "I think I'm done talking." She smiled. "You've said that before. This time I mean it." But later that night, in a small motel room tucked along the coast, Clint did something unexpected. He pulled out his notebook, the same one he always carried, and began to write. Not a movie, not a script, a letter. To anyone still listening, I didn't walk out to teach a lesson. I didn't come back to win. I came because I believe there's still value in showing up with purpose, and walking out when that purpose gets turned into a joke. We've built a world where volume replaces value, where being seen matters more than being understood. I'm not here to fix that. I'm here to remind you. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need a spotlight to have presence. And you don't need permission to walk out of a room that no longer respects what you bring into it. Stay quiet. Stay grounded, and when it's time, leave, not to prove something just because it's time. Clint, he tore the page out, folded it, set it on the desk, didn't post it, didn't send it, just left it there. Maybe someone would find it, maybe not, but it had been written. That was enough. Maggie found it the next morning. She didn't say anything. She just read it twice, folded it again, and tucked it into her bag. When Clint asked where they were heading next, she simply said, "Anywhere but backwards." He nodded. They drove in silence for nearly an hour. No music, no calls, no plans. And somewhere between the desert and the coast, the story faded behind them, not forgotten, not erased, just complete, back in LA. Jimmy finished taping his last episode of the season. As he stood at his desk, he paused, looked at the chair across from him, then said quietly, "Some people come here to be seen, some to be heard, and some come just once and leave something behind we'll never forget." He tapped his papers once, straightened his tie, and ended the show not with a joke, but with a nod, a silent one. The kind you give when there's nothing left to add. Somewhere on the internet, a commenter posted the original freeze frame of Clint sitting on Jimmy's stage during that first interview. The caption just read, "He didn't walk out to make noise. He walked out to make space." And underneath it, thousands of likes, no arguments, just respect.